In the spring of 1942, the Japanese began to feel vulnerable in the fight against the Americans. The Japanese hurried to expand their reach in the Pacific. They set their sights on the island of Midway Atoll, a pair of islands almost directly in between the mainland United States and Japan. By 1942, Midway was home to a brand new naval and air force base, and it would soon face its greatest challenge. This is the Battle of Midway. Japanese Navy is led by Admiral Yamamoto. Worried about the scope and speed of America's wartime industry, Yamamoto believed that the American naval forces needed to be defeated quickly before the U.S. can ramp up into the whole military production. Mirroring the success of Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto's entire strategy hinges on a surprise attack. The day before the Midway invasion, Yamamoto will send a small force to the Aleutian Islands off the coast of Alaska. He expects the Americans would divert their fleet to defend the islands, drawing their forces away from the Midway Islands. Yamamoto plans his invasion of Midway itself in 3 phases. Phase 1, the Japanese 1st Carrier Strike Force will attack Midway Island by air. This group is led by Vice Admiral Nagumo. His fleet is built around 4 aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Hiru, and Soru, 7 battleships, 150 support ships, 248 carrier aircrafts, and 15 subs. Phase 2, after the destruction of Midway's defenses, Yamamoto will bring in the Midway invasion force commanded by Vice Admiral Kondo. His ships will land 5,000 soldiers on the island, crushing any American forces. Phase 3, Yamamoto expects any American reinforcements to arrive from Pearl Harbor already diminished by Japanese offenses in Alaska. Nagumo's force will attack again, attacking the Americans in concert with Yamamoto's own fleet of battleships, carriers, and destroyers, waiting 600 miles to the west. Yamamoto expects his secret plan to shock and overwhelm the American military, giving the Japanese a decisive victory and a strong foothold in the Pacific. But that's not what happens. Commander Joseph Rosefort leads the U.S. Navy Combat Intelligence Unit. By March of 1942, Rosefort and his team had deciphered much of the Japanese naval code, and a discovery that would save countless American lives. They learned the time, size, and strategy of the impending invasion of Midway. Admiral Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, immediately starts drawing up plans. He would fight the battle mainly in the air, keeping his aircraft carriers well out of striking distance from the Japanese Navy. Nimitz's strike force is split up into 2 groups. Task Force 17 is led by Admiral Fletcher. USS Yorktown serves as his flagship. The 2nd Carrier Group, Task Force 16, is led by Rear Admiral Spruance. His group includes aircraft carrier USS Enterprise and USS Hornet, along with 50 support ships, 233 carrier aircrafts, 127 land-based aircrafts, and 8 subs. The U.S. forces are ready. Yamamoto thinks he has the Americans cornered, when in fact Nimitz is the one laying the trap. June 3rd, 1942, the Japanese strike the Aleutian Islands like planned, but Nimitz anticipated his move. He has stationed a small task force to intercept the force to defend the islands. As Yamamoto's forces approach Midway, he receives intelligence that there may be carriers in the area. Yamamoto wants to inform Admiral Nagumo, whose forces is further along. However, the Japanese were suspicious that the Americans were listening in on their radio communications, so Yamamoto chooses to remain radio silent. Meanwhile, at Midway, American forces prepare for the Japanese attack. Ensign Jack Reed, flying his scout plane through heavy fog, just barely spots the Japanese ship at 9:25 a.m. Reed thinks he spots the Japanese main fleet, but it was Admiral Kondo's invasion force, the group meant to attack Midway in Phase 2 of Yamamoto's plan. 9 B-17 bombers were sent to dispatch on torpedoes ships, but no hits. This is the first military combat of the Battle of Midway. Kondo doesn't inform Nagumo of the attack due to radio silence. Morning of June 4th, 1942, 15 B-17 bombers took off to search for any Japanese naval targets. Shortly after, Nagumo launched his Midway attack as planned. 108 aircraft carriers, fighters 0, the Val dive bombers, and Kate's torpedo bombers. Americans launched 4 separate groups of aircraft to attack Japanese fleet. 6 Avengers, 4 Marauders, 16 Dauntlesses, and 11 Vindicators. Japanese bombers swiftly bombed Midway's hangars, runways, hospitals, and power plant. American fighters outnumbered but still managed to defend their bases. After 27 minutes of hell raining down on Midway, the first phase of Yamamoto's plan is finished. But was it enough? At 7:05, Japanese pilot breaks radio silence, telling Nagumo another airstrike is needed. Nagumo now has a decision. Does he plan for another attack on Midway or prepare for a naval battle with potential carriers? Before he can decide, bombers and torpedoes begin to rain down on his fleet. American squadrons left earlier from Midway have finally reached the Japanese carriers. Nagumo is shocked. There was no way they could have reached his fleet unless they knew of his location in advance. While he was figuring out what to do next, he was shocked again as the American submarine Nautilus emerges behind his fleet. Nagumo still prepares his aircrafts to bomb Midway, but 13 minutes after his order, a Japanese scout plane spots 10 American ships off Midway. Nagumo is stunned. He orders his crew to stop armoring bombs and arm with torpedoes to attack enemy ships. Across the battlefield, Admirals Speranza, Enterprise, and Hornet begin to launch 116 aircrafts to begin to attack the Japanese carriers, as Yorktown prepares to launch more. At 8:20, Nagumo is informed at least one American aircraft carrier is in the area. He is shaken as he can't act until his bombers come back from Midway. At that time, Yamamoto receives word of the American carrier in the area, but thinks Nagumo will attack immediately. He decides to not interfere. That will prove costly. At 9:17, Nagumo bombers finally return. He orders his fleet to redirect to the only carrier he knows of. Not a minute later, the first squadron of B-17s arrived from the Hornet. Not escorted by fighters at all, 16 shot down. 2 more squadrons arrive, one from the Hornet, the other from Yorktown. Out of 27, only 6 return. It seems the Americans are overmatched. Japanese, feeling confident, they start to take their time refueling, and out of nowhere, at 10:22, 26 American Dauntlesses roar out of the sunlight and dive bomb the Akagi. This was the squadron led by Lieutenant Commander McCluskey that were the first bombers to leave at 7:06. Their mission to attack Japanese carriers, but at 9:22 when they arrived at the coordinates, there were no carriers in sight. So he had a decision to make: return home on little fuel they had, or take one last stab at the enemy carriers with little fuel they had. He chose what Admiral Nimitz would later say one of the most important decisions of the battle. Attacking on instinct, he turned his squadron northwest, the path he thought the Japanese would take. His quick thinking shifts the tide at Midway. McCluskey's squadron dropped 9 bombs that hit the Kaga, one striking a gasoline tanker that kills the entire command staff. The Kaga is destroyed. Within minutes, fighters and bombers from the Yorktown arrive. They dive and effectively attacking the Soru on the port side, striking the munition and engulfing the entire ship in flames. The next target is Admiral Nagumo's ship attacking the Akagi. U.S. fighters attack the Akagi, destroying the planes waiting to take off. A Japanese sailor would later describe as a burning hell. Nagumo was evacuated off the burning Akagi to the light cruiser Nagara. which he would then radio the damage to Nagamura. Only one carrier remained, the Haru, and that's only because they were well ahead. Naguma launched an air attack on the Yorktown. 18 dive bombers and 6 fighters take off from Hiru, but were intercepted by American fighters. 14 Japanese planes survived the fight and attacked the Yorktown. Yorktown was damaged but operational. Admiral Fletcher transfers to the heavy cruiser Astoria anyway, and transfers command to Admiral Spruance. Meanwhile, a second wave launched from Haru to strike the Yorktown. 5 Japanese torpedo bombers escaped the American fighter planes and landed 2 hits on the Yorktown, tilting the carrier 26 degrees with its flight deck almost touching the ocean. At 14:55, the order of abandoned ship was given. In retaliation, 40 Dauntlesses take off from Enterprise and Hornet, heading to Haru. They dive on Haru, which takes several critical hits and leaves the Haru disabled. It is the final surprise of the Japanese and final blow. Major combat is over throughout the Battle of Midway. Although small clashes would continue over the next 2 days, Americans had decisively won the Battle of Midway. Although both sides sustained major losses, the Japanese lost even more so. The Japanese lost 2,500 servicemen, 292 aircrafts, 1 heavy cruiser, and 4 aircraft carriers, while the U.S. lost 307 servicemen, 145 aircrafts, 1 destroyer, and 1 aircraft carrier. What was the impact of the Battle of Midway? Well, the Japanese, after the Battle of Midway, abandoned their plan to expand in the Pacific and would be on the defense for the rest of World War II.